They say betrayal whispers first, but that Mother's Day it slammed my door with a bouquet and a lie so clean you could see your face in it. If you're here for truth told without sugar, tap subscribe now and tell me where you're watching from, because this is the moment a polite smile became a loaded weapon. Marcus, my boy who grew into a boardroom storm, stepped into my small Atlanta kitchen with sun-yellow tulips and the tired grin of a man who thinks money fixes weather. "Mom," he said, setting the flowers by my chipped teapot, "Selena still sends the 5,000 every month, right? I want you comfortable." The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, then seemed to stop, as if time itself needed proof. 5,000? For 8 months, I traded pride for pantry boxes, stretched coupons until the ink thinned, and thanked neighbors for kindness that smelled like warm casseroles and mercy. I felt the room tilt, but my voice stayed steady in that old, church-trained way. "The church is helping me get by," I whispered. His smile fell like a mask slipping, and before truth could stand, perfume arrived. Selena. Heels like mirror shards, silk the color of ripe peaches, a smile polished bright enough to blind. "Evelyn," she breathed, "I drop it off every month. Maybe you forgot?" She placed a gift box on my table like a trophy on a grave. I looked at her, then at the tulips, then at my frayed apron and clean floor. I have known numbers longer than I have known her. Numbers never flirt and they never forget. "If it came," I said quietly, "it never found my hands." Marcus's eyes bounced between us, the woman who raised him on casseroles and late-night algebra, and the wife who could make a room applaud with a dress and a laugh. "Probably a mix-up," he offered, reaching for reasons like life preservers. "I'll check the accounts." I set a glass of orange juice in front of him, feeling a storm uncurl the way thunder loosens the sky. Selena's smile did not blink. "Banks can be so clumsy," she said, air light, "and memory can be selective." That word memory landed like a cold coin in my palm. I have buried a husband, kept a ledger through winters and grief, and I still remember the sound of my boy's first cry. I also remember every envelope that ever crossed this table, because I wrote each one down in a notebook that smells like prayers and ink. I chose silence, the kind that listens, and watched the room breathe. Outside, the neighborhood run ran through the window screen, buses sighing, a neighbor's radio floating Motown into the afternoon. Inside, the clock began again. "It's Mother's Day," Marcus tried, throat tight. "Let's not do this." "We aren't," I said, smoothing the tablecloth. "We're just telling time." They left in a gust of perfume and apology, and I stood in sunlight sliced by blinds, the tulips bright as a siren. 40,000 over 8 months. A furnace fixed, fresh fruit in the crisper, a winter without 3 sweaters. Instead, I'd counted church beans by lamplight and called it blessing. Blessing still, because even hunger can be honest, but truth deserved a chair. I pulled the spiral from the drawer, the same one that holds recipes and laments, turned to a blank page and wrote in a school teacher's hand, "Begin." Beneath it, "Find the truth. Don't trust shiny apologies." The kettle clicked off. I didn't pour. I stepped to the window and watched a white SUV prowl the curb, paint so new it still wore its showroom grin. I thought of forged smiles and easy signatures, of how a lie needs paper the way a flame needs air. Tomorrow, I would carry my passbook to Sweet Auburn Credit Union, ask for numbers without adjectives, then walk to Ebenezer Heights to sit in the last pew and let Pastor Lena's voice remind me that yeast rises no matter how tight a bowl is covered. Tonight, I would set the tulips in a mason jar, sweep the grit from their stems off my clean floor, and circle the 15th on the calendar. The day payroll hits, the day my son swears the wires fly. If there's a storm coming, let it come. I have a pen, a ledger, and a name I will not hand to a lie. Morning split itself into thin gold ribbons across my kitchen table, and I laid my life beneath them. Receipts bleached by sunlight, pill bottle printouts, utility stubs with edges gone soft, each one a mile marker that said, "No 5,000 passed this way." I boiled water out of habit, set 2 tea bags in my chipped mug as if company were coming, then slid open the drawer that holds everything I refused to lose: my passbook from Sweet Auburn Credit Union, my social security card in a plastic sleeve, and the spiral notebook that smells like ink and starch. I dated the top of a page and wrote "Reconcile," then printed the last 8 months in a neat column, space left beside each for a deposit that never arrived. The apartment kept quiet, just the clock's patient tick and the neighbor's washer thumping through thin walls, so I could hear my pencil say what a polite mouth won't: "They're lying." I put on my good cardigan, the navy one with a snag on the wrist, and walked to the credit union through late spring air that already carried summer's heat. The sidewalk radiated a hush that felt like before a choir lifts its first note. Inside, a young teller with knotless braids and the badge that read Brianna smiled at my passbook. "Any transfers from Marcus Carter into Evelyn Carter's account since January?" I asked, keeping my voice soft so the word mother didn't shake out from under my name. Her expression shifted the way a cloud moves, small but real, while she typed and listened to the screen. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," she said gently. "No incoming transfers, just routine interest in February, $1.19. The number rang like a bell no one wanted to hear. "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it. Mercy lives in truth, even when it hurts your knees. Outside, buses sighed and the motorcycle stitched its noise along the curb, and I stood under a crepe myrtle to breathe through the pinch behind my eyes. Numbers do not misremember. Numbers do not get flustered by silk. I tucked my passbook close and walked 3 blocks to Ebenezer Heights, the church with a sanctuary that smells like lemon oil, page-thin Bibles, and old song. I slipped into the last pew while the building manager tested the sound system, and in that empty room I let my bones settle the way flour drops and finds its level. Pastor Lena found me there anyway, as if God had sent her on a short, precise errand. "You look like a woman who has a ledger and a storm," she said, leaning on the pew with a sister's weight. "Both," I admitted, and told her what the teller had told me. She nodded once, the way a nurse does when she's already seen the x-ray. "Truth rises," she said. "Yeast in warm dough. You can press it down, but it will lift again. Write everything. Call no one a liar. Let the paper do it." At home, I obeyed like a student. Dated lines, times, the color of dresses and cars, the phrases that felt rehearsed. June 11th. Selena brought a lavender bundle, laughed at bank delays, no envelope. July 9th. Phone call, restaurant clatter behind her, promised to stop by tomorrow, didn't. I stapled a grocery receipt to the page, not because it mattered legally, but because it anchored me to a meal I'd made without their 5,000. In the afternoon heat, a white SUV, new, plates still wearing paper, rolled past my window like a grin with an engine. 15 minutes later, my phone pinged with a message from Marcus. "Everything good? Selena says she checked on the 10th. I held the phone as you hold a hot plate and set it down before it burned me. I typed one sentence: "I'll check the 15th at the bank," and left it at that. Then I dialed his firm and asked for accounting the way a mother asks for directions at a gas station. Polite, harmless, impossible to refuse. A woman named Doris answered with the voice of someone who files truth for a living. I kept it light. "Just confirming a family matter. Are the monthly transfers to Evelyn Carter going out?"
Paper rustled, a keyboard ticked. "Yes, ma'am," she said finally, careful as if each word carried a seal. "Yes, ma'am. Same day each month, 5,000. Recipient name reads Evelyn L. Carter, but I can't disclose the account number." I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still while the apartment drew its breath. "L," I said to the room, "because my middle initial is not L." The tea bags had bled cold into the mug. I drank anyway, bitter and perfect. I opened the spiral and drew a small box next to each month's line and wrote in the margin, "Name spoofed. Account misdirected." The pencil felt like a key turning. I phoned the church office and asked if Pastor Lena could store a sealed envelope for me. "Just notes," I said, "in case I misplace my notebook." When I walked it over, a copy of the pages so far, I felt as if I were tucking a seed into good soil. On the way back, I passed Selena's boutique on the corner, a window full of dresses that cost more than my stove. Mannequins stared out like witnesses too elegant to speak. I stood there long enough to see my reflection floating among satin, an older woman holding a notebook, and I told her, "We are not confused." At home, I drew a tight circle around the 15th on the kitchen calendar and wrote beside it, in steady letters my fifth-grade teacher would have approved, "Let the date talk." Then I closed the blinds to keep the late sun from bleaching the tulips and sat down to sharpen my pencil. The next step wasn't rage or confrontation. It was arithmetic. And arithmetic, bless it, never loved anyone enough to lie.
The knock came just after noon. 3 polite taps that sounded like someone who respects doors and numbers. And when I opened it, there stood a lean man in a navy blazer with travel creases and a briefcase that had seen too many conference rooms. "Miss Carter?" he asked, voice even. "Whitaker, senior accountant at Carter and Finch. Dora said you called." I let him in and set out 2 mugs while the kettle thought about boiling. Sunlight slid across my small table as he snapped open the briefcase and laid down a clipped stack like a dealer who only trades in truth. 8 wire confirmations, one for each of the last 8 months. $5,000 per. Sender, Marcus Carter. Recipient, Evelyn L. Carter. Routing to an account number I'd never met. "That L," I said, tapping the page with a finger that suddenly felt steadier than my heart, "does more harm than a lie told to your face." He nodded, sliding forward a second sheet, the account opening documents, my name typed neat as Sunday school, my address wrong by 2 digits, and a photocopied ID with my birth date in a shadow that was not my face. "The system accepted it," he said, embarrassed on behalf of a machine. "Authorization appears to bear your signature, but it's a paste from an old check. See the tremor line here? And the notary stamp belongs to a strip mall mailbox store." The kettle clicked off. I forgot to pour. He went on gently, like a surgeon narrating while he works so the patient doesn't float away. "There's also misuse of your son's corporate secondary card meant for clients. We flagged spa services, boutique jewelry, first-class tickets to Miami and back, and a vehicle down payment credited to Amaranth Motors. 32,000 in 90 days. The numbers didn't stab. They settled, heavy and cold, like a winter coat across my shoulders. "Marcus?" I asked, because hope is a habit you don't break easily. "He signs what's cued," Whitaker said, not unkindly. "He trusts." He slid over a pen and a single-page authorization for me to request third-party confirmations. "This lets me get written statements from the bank for your attorney." "I don't have one," I said, then heard my own voice add, "Yet." When he left, I stood a moment with the counter at my back, the apartment humming its small, faithful noises, then sat down, dated a clean page in the spiral, and wrote, "August 4. Whitaker confirmed forged account in my name. Corporate misuse. Amounts itemized."
Not a mistake, a design. I took a breath and dialed Priya Anand, my college friend, who once argued a case so clean the judge quoted her in the ruling. Her hello carried caffeine and momentum. I explained the pages, the L, the photocopied me. She didn't hurry me. Evelyn, she said when I'd finished, kind, wrapped in steel. This is elder financial exploitation and bank fraud with the marital overlay. We'll bring it civil first, criminal if they stonewall. Don't confront yet. Gather. Let them contradict themselves on the record. On the record, I repeated, and looked at my kitchen calendar where the 15th wore its circle like a target. The plan rose simple and whole. Invite them where they feel safe. Ask a question with only one honest answer, and let time do the rest. I wrote an invitation the old-fashioned way because ink doesn't leak tone. Sunday supper, 6 p.m. Herb chicken, buttered corn, pound cake. Bring your appetite and your good news. Then I pulled a manila envelope from the hall closet and lettered the front in blue pen, Neighborhood Pantry Donations, because a lie loves pomp but fears plain paper. Inside, I slit the copies Whitaker left and a tidy list of totals in my own hand. The next day, I walked to the church office and asked Pastor Lena if I could borrow 3 folding chairs for a little neighborhood talk, which was almost true, and she raised an eyebrow that meant she'd seen enough families to know when love and fire share a room. Still, she helped me carry the chairs to my trunk and tucked a small prayer into my palm without words. At home, I cooked in stages, as if ritual could make a floor steadier. Rosemary and lemon under chicken skin, corn scraped into a bowl that belonged to my mother, pound cake batter beating itself glossy while the radio gave me Sam Cooke like a benediction. Between steps, I reviewed Whitaker's pages until the numbers no longer felt like rope, but like rails that would carry me across. I set the table with thrifted china and polished forks, laid the manila envelope at the center like a quiet heartbeat, and slid my spiral notebook into the drawer nearest my right hand. When the white SUV idled at the curb late Saturday, I didn't look through the blinds. I didn't need its glare in my kitchen. Instead, I sharpened the pencil, poured tea into the mug I'd meant to pour yesterday, and told the room they will answer their own question. Before bed, I called Priya back and said, "Tomorrow, I'll ask what day she sends it." And Priya smiled into the line. I could hear it. Good. Don't lead. Let the date talk. And Evelyn, whatever happens, you have already chosen yourself. I slept with the window cracked to the late summer chorus and dreamed not of confrontation, but of columns balancing, of red numbers turning black, of a gavel striking not to punish, but to close a wound. In the morning, I woke with a calm I recognized from the hardest days of my life, the kind that means you will walk into the moment and keep your name. Sunday came dressed like memory, the kind with lemon polish on wood and a radio low in the next room, and I laid the house out like an argument you could eat. Rosemary chicken bronzing in the oven, buttered corn shining in a bowl my mother once held, pound cake cooling on the rack as the late sun laced itself through the blinds. I set the table with thrifted china and the good forks, the manila envelope lettered Neighborhood Pantry Donations resting quiet at center like a heart that knows how to wait. At 6 on the dot, tires sighed along the curb and the white SUV flashed across my wall. Marcus came in first in a crisp white shirt and the kind of tired smile that says a man is trying to carry 2 lives in one set of hands. And Selena slid behind him in a blush silk dress with pearls like small, patient moons at her throat, her perfume moving ahead of her the way applause follows a curtain call. "Smells like childhood," Marcus said, kissing my cheek. "Smells like commitment," I answered, and meant the kind you make to yourself. We ate in the easy pattern families remember, past the corn, more tea, a laugh about the neighbor's new puppy, and I watched the room learn my breathing, how it slowed when truth got close. I kept small talk running like a brook around stones. "How's the boutique?" I asked, and Selena smiled with all her teeth. "Blessed and busy," she said, then launched into a story about a client who needed 3 dresses for 3 events. And I nodded in the places where nods are expected, filing away how her voice lifted on luxury but flattened on gratitude. When the chicken bones showed clean and the candles burned low, I reached for the envelope as if it were nothing but paper and tapped it with one finger. "Before the neighbors come," I said lightly, "I want your advice on the pantry fund. I've been saving documentation. I like to keep things tidy." Marcus's shoulders loosened. Work talk is home for him. And he leaned in, ready to help. Selena's eyes flickered, tiny storm clouds glitching across a sunny forecast. "Oh, Evelyn, always so organized," she laughed, and I let the laugh fall where it wanted. I slid out a single page, the transfer summary Whitaker had prepared, and placed it on the china where a dessert plate should go. "I want to be sure I'm aligning with your generosity," I said. "On what date do you usually send the allowance?" The question wore a cotton dress, soft and plain. Selena answered so fast it sounded rehearsed. "The 10th, of course," she said, reaching for her wine. I felt the smallest click inside me, like a door catching. Marcus frowned, almost apologetically. "No, babe," he said, gentle and firm the way a good man corrects a calendar. "It's the 15th. I set the auto transfer on payroll." The room paused the way a choir pauses before a key change. One suspended breath. And even the refrigerator chose that moment to go silent, as if electricity itself wanted to listen. I didn't blink. I rested my hands on the envelope and smiled as though we'd solved a recipe mystery. "Perfect," I said. "Then I'll check on the 15th. Banks do love their routines." Selena's smile tightened to a ribbon you could hear pulling. "Banks make errors," she said lightly, fingers tapping her crystal stem, "and people forget things all the time." "Numbers don't," I replied, still smiling. "That's why I like them." For a heartbeat, her face went still, the way a pond goes flat before stone breaks it. Then she changed the subject so hard the flowers shivered, asking Marcus about a client dinner and the new office lease, words thrown like handfuls of rice at a leaving train. I poured coffee, cut the pound cake, and let ordinary grace return to the table. "More cream? This slice is for you, son." Because a snare doesn't spring with noise. It closes when everyone thinks they are safe. At the door, when the night had cooled and I'd slipped foil over leftovers, I hugged Marcus long enough to feel his breath change and pressed a slice of cake into his hand the way mothers send love wrapped in sugar. "You did good, Mom," he whispered, though he didn't know why he said it. And I kissed his temple like he was 5 and headed off to kindergarten. Selena held her clutch like a shield and floated a final smile across my threshold. "We'll talk to the bank," she promised, voice syrup over ice. "We will," I agreed, and watched the pearls at her throat rise and fall like a metronome counting down. When the SUV's light slipped from my windows, the apartment exhaled. I slid the envelope back in the drawer beside my ledger, circled the 15th on the calendar one more time for the stubborn angels who liked the reminders, and sat for a long minute at the cleared table, listening to the faint tick of the clock and the far-off rumble of a train moving through the city. The trap wasn't a trick, it was a date. And dates, bless them, tell the truth in their own time. On the morning of the 15th, the mail carrier's knock came with the shy authority of someone who brings answers. I signed for a thick manila packet and laid it on my table like a loaf still warm from the oven, then slid it open to find neat columns, bank crests, Whitaker's blue ink notes, 8 transfers of $5,000 each, support E. Carter, routed to the counterfeit account wearing my name with an extra initial like a stolen brooch, plus a tidy parade of sins on the corporate secondary card, spa packages, boutique jewelry, first-class seats to Miami, and a down payment at Amaranth Motors that still smelled like sales floor wax.
I didn't cry. I put on my glasses and made a legend in the spiral: red for lies, green for recovery. Then dialed Pastor Lena and asked for the fellowship hall for a neighborhood giving night, which was true enough, because truth was about to be given in full. By late afternoon, the room was set with folding chairs and a long table draped in white. I arranged a tray of lemonade, coffee, and store-bought cookies that tasted like politeness, and in the center I placed my neighborhood pantry donations envelope beside a tin labeled blessings, because a lie masks itself in glamour, but it fears plain words. Marcus and Selena arrived a few minutes early, the white SUV's engine still purring caution. He wore that same tired white shirt, sleeves rolled, a man trying to roll up his life, and she floated in a charcoal sheath with diamond studs like twin commas, as if her sentence could keep going forever. "This looks nice," Marcus said, scanning the room, and I heard a boy who once stacked chairs after youth night. "We're just talking about generosity," I answered, steady as a plumb line, and gestured for them to sit. I eased a single sheet from the envelope, Whitaker's transfer summary with dates highlighted, and slid it across the table to my son, then placed a saucer and cup in front of Selena as if this were tea and not a mirror. "Before the neighbors come," I said, "I'd love your feedback on the records I'm keeping for the pantry, since you've been so faithful monthly." Marcus traced the lines the way a man reads his own pulse. I watched confusion drain into shock as the header, recipient, Evelyn L. Carter, told him his mother had been turned into an alias. "That's not her account," he murmured, and the room pulled in its breath. Selena reached for his wrist with a practiced tremble. "Thanks, Miss Label, love," she said. "And you know your mother's been stressed." "Do banks mislabel spot packages?" I asked gently, laying out a glossy receipt with her name in tidy font, followed by a travel confirmation and a vehicle down payment slip that winks the same way her studs did. "Those are business relationships," she snapped, warmth vanishing from her voice like steam torn from a kettle. The door behind them opened on a soft hinge, and Whitaker stepped in, hat in hand, suit clean, eyes honest. "Miss Carter invited me here," he said to Marcus before anyone could declare otherwise. I compiled these myself and verified each entry with the issuing institutions. Selena's mouth formed a perfect O before flattening into a line that could cut glass. "This is harassment," she said, but it sounded like stage fright. "It's reconciliation," I replied, still soft. Marcus sat back as if someone had pulled a thread beneath him. He lifted the SPA receipt between two careful fingers, then the airline stub, then the banknote with its counterfeit me. "Selena?" he asked in a voice I'd only heard once, when he broke his arm at 7 and refused to cry until he got home. "Just for a while," she said, the words coming fast, slippery. "I borrowed, only borrowed. I meant to pay it back when the boutique closed on the spring line. Your mother doesn't need cash. She needs respect," I said, not raising my voice because truth never has to shout. "She needs respect." The hall swallowed the sentence and gave it back to us dressed in silence. Pastor Lena, who had been stacking programs across the room, paused and folded her hands the way one does at a bedside. Whitaker set a final page in front of Marcus, authorization forms with my forged signature, the notary stamp that belonged to a mailbox store, and the address off by 2 digits. "I'm sorry," he said to me without looking away from the documents, apology radiating from a man who loves numbers because they do not betray. "We'll help your consul secure original statements." Selena's eyes went glassy, not with remorse but calculation. "Marcus," she said brightly, as though this were a dinner she could pivot, "let's not embarrass your mother with all this. We'll fix it privately. We always do." Marcus didn't move. He set the paper down and looked at his hands, those hands that once held Legos and now held a company, and shook his head slowly like a man waking from a half-kind, half-cruel dream. "No," he said, voice low, "we fix it properly." I reached into the envelope, pulled out my ledger, and placed it on the table with the gravity of a family Bible. June 11th, lavender bouquet, banks are slow, no envelope. July 9th, restaurant noise, tomorrow, no show. The dates matched the wires like steps match a staircase. Outside, the evening traffic whispered along Boulevard like a rumor giving up its last breath. Inside, my son closed his eyes and exhaled the kind of exhale that empties a room of every excuse. "Mom," he said, and his mouth stuttered over the word the way it did when he was small and afraid. "I'm sorry." I didn't touch him. I kept my hands on the table, open, palms lined with flour, ink, and time. "I don't be sorry to me," I said. "Be faithful to the truth." Then I capped my pen, slid the ledger back into the envelope, and felt the floor of my life steady, because proof once gathered is a bridge, and we were finally standing on it. The courthouse smelled like paper, coffee, and decisions. Thin air that made people speak in complete sentences. And I walked in beside Priya Anand, who wore a charcoal suit like a promise, while I wore my best blue and the steadiness I'd practiced in my kitchen. Soina sat at the defendant's table in a black sheath and an expression rehearsed in mirrors, her lips the color of a sealed envelope, her new attorney young enough to still believe in shortcuts. And behind them, Marcus took a seat alone, hands threaded, face pale with a kind of honesty that hurts before it heals. When the clerk called our case, and the judge, a silver-haired woman with a gaze like a level, took the bench, the room's murmur flattened into caution. Priya rose first, no theatrics, just the spine of the matter. "Your Honor, for 8 consecutive months, the defendant routed $5,000 monthly transfers intended from Miss Evelyn Carter into a fraudulent account opened in Miss Carter's name with a forged signature and mismatched address. Additionally, the defendant used Mr. Carter's corporate secondary card for personal luxury expenditures, spa packages, jewelry, first-class flights, and a vehicle down payment." She placed binders on the evidence cart, tabs crisp like hymnal edges. Whitaker testified next with an accountant's clean mercy. Dates, amounts, bank confirmations, notary stamp from a mailbox store, signature lift traced from an old check, the tremor line visible beneath magnification. "Numbers aren't unkind," he said. "They're indifferent, and they tell the same story every time." Selena's attorney stood, smoothing his tie, and tried to paint the mess as household fluidity and benign mismanagement, then steered the conversation toward my age the way a driver drifts to the shoulder when he's out of road. "Miss Carter, at 68, is it possible your memory—" Priya was up before the sentence finished. "Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence and traffics in stereotype." The judge tilted her head. "Sustained. Counsel will confine himself to facts." I kept my hands folded, palms cool, and answered what I was permitted to answer with the same tone I used to teach Sunday school math. "I wrote it down, Your Honor. Each visit, each promise, each date. My ledger aligns with the bank's." Pastor Lena, seated behind me with a small notebook and a prayer tucked between its pages, nodded once, as if to say, "Yes, yeast rises." Then came the part that would have been theater if the stakes weren't so ordinary and so high. Selena took the stand, lashes lowered, voice tremulous on cue. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said. "Marcus was overwhelmed, and I took on the burden of managing the household. I believe the account was right. I may have confused dates. Miss Carter can be forgetful." The word forgetful hit the room like a cheap cymbal. Priya didn't flinch. She approached with a single page and a tone that could fillet a lie without spilling blood. "Miss Carter, is this your notary? The stamp belongs to a commercial mailbox, not an officer of the state. Is this your signature? Because our forensic analysis shows a paste of Miss Evelyn Carter's signature from a 2014 check register. And this address, 2 digits off Miss Carter's actual residence, who supplied it?" Silence, then a throat clearing. I don't recall," Selena said, almost a whisper. "You recall spa packages," Priya replied evenly, placing the glossy receipts beneath the court's document camera so that the total blinked like an accusation. A ripple moved through the gallery, the kind that isn't sound but the breath people make when the obvious stands up and names itself. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, voice even. "Miss Carter, the wire confirmations list recipient, Evelyn L. Carter. Miss Carter's middle initial is not L. The court also notes a pattern of misrepresentation inconsistent with benign mismanagement." She turned to me. "Miss Carter, do you seek restitution?" "Only what was meant for me, Your Honor, and the opportunity to stop this from happening again." Priya asked for restitution of the 8 transfers, repayment of corporate misuse to the company, fees and costs, and an injunction restricting Selena from managing or accessing any of Marcus's personal or business accounts for 5 years, plus mandatory financial ethics coursework. Selena's attorney objected in fragments, a handful of damp matches. The judge struck them down without heat. Judgment came in a voice that carried like a bell struck with care. The court finds for the plaintiff restitution in the amount of $40,000 to Miss Carter within 30 days, reimbursement of misused corporate charges to Carter and Finch, cost to plaintiff, defendant is enjoined from controlling or accessing any of Mr. Carter's accounts for 5 years and shall complete a certified financial responsibility course. The court refers the forged notary and signature to the appropriate authorities. The gavel landed once, clean, not cruel, and the sound felt like a bone setting. Selena blinked, composure fissuring at the edges, and reached for Marcus's arm. He didn't offer it. He looked at me instead with a grief I recognized, the grief of a man who has learned what trust is not, and mouthed, "I'm sorry." A sentence that arrived too late for prevention, but right on time for repair. In the hallway, under fluorescent lights that made everyone honest, I stood with Priya and Whitaker, while Pastor Lena pressed my hands between hers. "Truth rose," she said simply, and I nodded and felt the truth of it in my ribs. No triumph rolled through me, no hunger for scenes beyond this one, only release, the quiet kind you feel when a door that's stuck for months finally opens on a single steady pull. Outside, the city carried on. Sirens somewhere far, a bus sighing, a woman laughing into her phone, and I thought of my ledger at home, of the blue circle around the 15th, of the manila envelope that had sat like a lighthouse on my table. Justice wasn't loud today. It was neat columns and a judge's pen and a son's eyes lifting finally to meet his mother's without fog between them. I breathed in, breathed out, and let the building exhale me back into a life where I still had my name. The weeks after the ruling arrived like quiet guests. No drama, no speeches, just envelopes, errands, and a house that finally exhaled. The restitution hit my account with a banker's tidy courtesy line, and I stared at the numbers as if they were a sunrise I'd prayed for so often I no longer recognized it when it came. Then did the necessary, unglamorous things a steady life requires. I paid the roofer, who'd patched the leaks with tar and hope, replaced the radiator that coughed like an old smoker, bought fresh fruit that perfumed the kitchen with a luxury I'd once called memory, and left the remainder where it belonged, not to be paraded, but to be used with sense. The phone stayed mostly quiet. Marcus texted twice, short, careful messages that read like a man learning the feel of a bridge he helped burn. And I let the silence be a teacher, because grief and clarity both prefer classrooms without chatter. One night, the sky split open and poured a southern sermon, rain hurling itself against the windows, and a knock came at 10 like an apology that finally found the right door. When I opened it, Marcus stood soaked through, hair plastered, breath white with cold and confession, and he stepped inside as if the threshold were a mountain. Mom, I am sorry, he said, voice frayed. Not dramatic, just honest, the way a truth is when it's done running. He sat hard on the hall rug, and I remembered his 7-year-old cry, silent, jaw set, when he broke his arm, how he saved the tears for home. I wrapped him in the old crochet throw, brewed ginger tea, and let the fire carry the talking for a while. I should have checked, he managed. I gave her my signature and called it love. You gave her trust, I said. The mistake was letting it walk alone. He flinched at that but nodded, the nod of a man who finally sees the shape of his own handprints in the dust. He slept on the couch with the throw up to his chin like a boy who'd outrun wolves. And in the morning, he stood at the sink washing last night's cup and said a sentence I didn't know I'd been waiting for. How do I help make something good from what I broke? I told him about the idea that had been scratching at my ribs. Gentle Harbor, a small nonprofit tucked into the church's basement to help elders untangle the nets of family fraud. Intake forms that didn't condescend, referrals to legal aid, a fund for emergency groceries, a room where listening was policy and tea was standard. He said yes before I'd finished the list. That Saturday, he arrived early at Ebenezer Heights with a carrier of coffee and a willingness that made the old tile glow. He lifted folding chairs as if they were penance and privilege, helped Pastor Lena restock the pantry shelves alphabetically at my fussy insistence, then sat with Priya to map a simple intake process that wouldn't drown a wounded person in paperwork. We hung a hand-painted sign, Gentle Harbor, a place to start again. Crooked at first and then righted, the way new vows often are. People came in ones and twos, carrying grocery sacks of documents and faces that wore the same mixture I'd worn for months. Shame's downward tilt and stubborn dignity's lift. Marcus learned to listen without rescuing, to staple without flinching, to say, let's check the date, the way a paramedic says, breathe. He drove Mrs. Fowler to the credit union to close a joint account her nephew had siphoned. He sat with Mr. Leonard while Priya explained conservatorship like a map instead of a trap. He made a budget for the pantry that squeezed miracles from coupons and manufacturer rebates. In the evenings, we returned to my kitchen divested of grand gestures and heavy with ordinary grace. He chopped onions with a concentration that looked like prayer. I stirred stew until bay leaves woke their history. And sometimes we ate in a comfortable near silence broken by small necessary sentences. I'm selling the condo. I canceled the joint card. I called Dad's old friend to say I was wrong. I did not tell him he was forgiven because forgiveness had already arrived and taken a seat without needing a speech. I simply handed him the salt when he reached for it and let our hands bump, and we both pretended not to notice how relief can make a mother's knuckles shake. At night, I still wrote in the ledger, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit and gratitude. Dates of pantry disbursements, initials of visitors, the way Mr. Leonard's laugh returned on a Tuesday at 3:17. And I drew a new legend beneath the old one. Red for harm, green for repair, gold for moments a life shifts quietly onto a truer track. When I closed the notebook each night, I touched the circle around the 15th, a relic of the trap that turned into a compass, and I thought, we are not what was done to us. We are what we do next. Outside, cicadas tuned the summer dusk. Inside, my son stacked clean bowls like promises, and I let the house memorize the sound. Spring tipped Atlanta into soft greens and early heat, and Gentle Harbor, our little basement office with a hand-painted sign and a second-hand printer that coughed like a distant bus, began to feel less like a project and more like a place people could walk into and set something heavy down. We kept the door propped with a rubber wedge, a tray of tea always steeping, and a whiteboard where Marcus wrote the day's small wins in block letters so no one had to squint to see hope. Mrs. Fowler closed the siphoned account. Mr. Leonard's grandson agreed to counseling. Emergency groceries delivered, 4 families. Priya taught Saturday workshops that sounded like plain English instead of law school: how to read a bank statement, how to spot a forged signature, how to freeze a credit report without losing your mind, while Pastor Lena kept our paper flow merciful and our tone human. Whittaker stopped by in the evenings, jacket off, to help us design a 1-page reconciliation map that let a person chart money like a river and see where it left its banks. I watched Marcus learn the choreography of steady work, answering a phone before the third ring,
labeling a folder with the care of a librarian, saying, "Let's check the date," as if it were a blessing. And I understood the day he first arrived, soaked and sorry, had not been the end of anything, so much as the door to this. Sometimes grief does not leave, it changes jobs. In late May, a letter arrived from the city council with a gold seal that looked almost theatrical against our scuffed esque. They wanted to recognize Gentle Harbor at their community justice evening, not because we'd solved something grand, but because we'd proved something small can stand. I ironed my blue dress until the seams remembered their duty and polished my wedding band with toothpaste the way my mother taught me. And when we reached the hall, a modest room with flags and folding chairs and the clean smell of floor wax, I felt a calm I had not known even on the day the gavel fell. The host read its heady paragraph that sounded like a stranger I would like to meet, then asked me to say a few words. I walked to the podium with my ledger tucked under my arm, not as a prop, but because it had carried me through the dark. And I said what I know. Thank you for this kindness. We are not here because we are brave. We are here because paper told the truth and we listened. Justice, for most of us, isn't fireworks. It is a ledger line, a corrected address, a son who learns to walk with proof. I didn't look for applause, and it came anyway, gentle as rain. In the front row, Marcus's eyes shone with the particular pride of someone who has scrubbed the floor he once dirtied. After the event, people pressed my hands. Teachers, a bus driver, a woman who whispered she kept her mother's pens in a notebook under a casserole dish, and we took their stories the way we take donations, with a smile, a form, and a promise to call on Tuesday. That night at home, the house felt different, but not bigger. I set the certificate on the counter beside the grocery list and lit a small candle by the old family photo, because ceremony without supper is just noise. Marcus washed the dishes while I wrote the day's entries in the ledger, initials, dates, miles driven, and then below the grid, I drew a thin line and wrote a new sentence I hadn't planned. The money came back, but dignity stayed. I closed the book and rested my palm on its cover the way a nurse rests a hand on a patient's shoulder, not to heal, but to say, "I am here." The phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Miss Carter, my aunt says you help people who don't want to make a fuss." And I smiled because that is exactly who we help. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch. The lavender Marcus replanted in a larger pot brushed my ankles, cicadas tuned the dusk, and somewhere down the block, a neighbor laughed into the thick air. I thought, not of Selena, whose absence had become quiet fact like an old scar, but of the women and men who would walk through our door tomorrow carrying envelopes and shame and resolve. I thought of how we would slide a chair out for each of them and say, "Let the date talk." Inside, I placed the ledger on the shelf beside the church cookbook and the hymnal I never return on time, and taped a small note to the inside cover for whoever might need it when I'm done with it. Begin with the simplest true thing. Write it down and keep your name. I turned off the lamp and paused at the threshold of my bedroom, grateful not for an award or a balance, but for the ordinary. A roof that doesn't leak, fruit in a bowl, a son stacking chairs for tomorrow's workshop. If betrayal tried to make a home here, it failed. Truth signed the lease instead, and we pay in attention, receipts, and tea. I lay down and listened to the house breathe, the ledger's quiet weight settling on its shelf, the future arranging its papers for morning.